has been moved to current affairs.
Hello, and welcome to Dystopian Fiction Has Been Moved to Current Affairs. Welcome to episode 37, where we, and that is myself, Claire, and Masha, are going to be talking about Fahrenheit 451, a novel from 1953 by Ray Bradbury. Also been made into a couple of films, one from 1966, which we've not seen, one from 2018, which I have seen, although it's not going to go down in the records for brilliance. And what else did we say? Like a stage play and an
An
opera. So,
opera.
yeah, which tragically we've not seen the opera, but we'll
It's
be
on our list,
focusing.
however.
Yeah, absolutely. Let us know if it's coming to a theatre near you. Um, but yeah, so Fahrenheit 451. Marsha's going to tell us what it's about.
Okay, so in the world of Fahrenheit 451, which is named after the temperature at which books are burned, but I think this is now a contested fact, but the themes of the book remain the same. Um, yes. So, Fahrenheit 451 is set in a sort of not so distant future, where our main character Montag, his I guess, occupation is as a fireman. In this world, firemen don't put out fires; they in fact start fires in order to burn all of the world's books. I'm really struggling to get this out today. To burn all the world's books, and people across America deeply fear books. No one's allowed to own them, and sort of the firemen who are the agents of the government go around and seek them out, with people reporting each other in,
Mm.
and they'll come and pour kerosene all over your house, and there you go. So the story follows Montag, who I guess sort of awakens from his stupor after he meets a young girl called Clarice, whose family has just recently moved into his neighborhood. And through sort of short conversations that he has with her on his way to and from work, he starts to sort of question little bits about his life, initially about his happiness and his interactions with his wife, who during her time spends it in their three-walled TV screen
Yeah.
of a
Yeah.
lounge, basically. So on all sides, she is consuming TV and media, and even through a little earpiece,
Mm.
she's constantly being fed.
Like
Uh,
the AirPods of the past or the
yeah,
future or
AirPods of
something.
the
Yeah,
past.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. Through her little AirPods, she's being fed a radio stream, radio broadcast. So constantly just like passively consuming this media. And I guess something else that wakes Montag from his stupor and sort of day to day is her she committed suicide, and after her revival, he again kind of realizes there's something wrong deeply with society, and he starts to question these things around him, including his co-workers at the fire station. And he starts to steal books that he is meant to be burning, and that kind of implicates him in all sorts of things. Um, Eventually, having him get caught by his captain, his boss, and he both burns down his own house and most of the books inside, as well as commits a murder, meaning he is on the run at the end of the book. And this sort of, I guess, manhunt for him leads him to escape the city and meet these sort of, I guess, book professor hippies out in
yeah.
the country who basically tell him we're going to try and reintroduce knowledge into the world by memorizing these books and burning them
Mm.
ourselves. So yeah, and then the war, there's a whole war kind of subplot in the background, which kicks off at the end of the book, and it inadvertently saves Montags's life as like the whole city is burnt up. I've also missed out a whole entire character called Faber, I want to say. And Faber's role in the book was I guess who Montag reaches out to be his teacher, who he briefly met in a park sometime. And they sort of recited poetry together, I think.
Mm.
And Faber and Montag initially come up with the plot to try and implicate all firemen, plant different books in their houses to sort of cast doubt in their society. But this obviously fails, and Montag eventually ends up on the run. So that's kind of it's quite. I don't know how I've managed to make that a more complicated plot than it needed to be, but there you go. There are lots of moving parts in my brain today, but there you are. So
No, that's good.
I guess we've got to sort of start with the main theme of censorship, I feel, is or
Yeah,
this special kind of
absolutely.
censorship in the book.
Yeah, because obviously the theme of book burning makes us think of things like the burning of books under Nazism and other
Mm,
authoritarian regimes in the UK and the US. I suppose it makes me think about censorship in books, like in libraries and things like that, rather than like states banning books like they have in the past with books that have got lewd themes or whatever that were banned. Now it's this question about, I suppose, how certain books are seen to dissent and therefore are being removed from libraries. And there was a fairly chilling article in The Guardian earlier this year. We'll put the link in the notes, but that was basically looking at the way in which a phenomenon that has been very pronounced in the US, particularly focusing on LGBTQ plus books, is now spilling over, and some of those campaign groups and so on are spilling over into targeting UK libraries and schools and the like. So that is obviously related. But I mean, what did you think that Bradbury was trying to say about censorship and book burning?
I guess, yeah. So the was I guess the sort of discussion is less about the themes of each individual book and
Mm.
more trying to police people's ability to of like free thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I guess like the main censorship is against like intellectualism
Mm.
rather than specific themes.
Yeah, because and there's a bit I think where Faber says he basically says it's not about books per se, it's uh, the infinite detail and awareness that could be
mm,
in radio and television, but it's not. And he says you can find it in like old records and movies and in talking to friends. But he basically says that books have a quality, a texture. He says the book has pores, it has features. This book can go under the microscope. You'll find life under the glass, streaming past in infinite profusion. The more pores, the more
mm,
truthfully recorded details of life per square inch you can get on a sheet of paper, the more literary you are. Um, so it says the good writers touch life often, the mediocre ones run a quick hand over her, the bad ones rape her and leave her for the flies. So he says that's why books are hated and feared. So it's not, as you say, about any particular content, rather about the kind of quality and
mhm.
depth of content that can be allowed or was previously allowed in books, which I think is an interesting one. I was watching doing some comfort watching this week, some stressful things. So I had to watch some Buffy the Vampire Slayer to overcome them. And there's a bit where, so bearing in mind, Buffy was started in the late 90s, mid to late 90s. There's a lot of stuff about like the old books, Giles the librarian, and the new computer with Miss Calendar, the techno pagan computer class teacher, and Giles says, when asked about why he doesn't like computers, he says, it's the smell. And she's like, computers don't smell. And he's like, I know, that's why they're bad. Like, books have got that like substance to them. Um, and although that's obviously in a way nonsensical, much as I do like the smell of books, the idea I think about that there is a kind of lack of substance of depth associated with certain other forms of media. Um, Not all of it. I mean, we spend every fortnight digging into films and TV shows and things like that. But
Yeah.
there is some quality, I think, about some of the way that our media content is going that reflects some of the fears I think that Bradbury was putting
Yeah.
forward.
I guess like the
Um,
thing with TV and like more digitized media that you
mm,
consume through a screen, it's like
mm,
your people can uh, like consume it passively, whilst I feel like
mm,
having like reading a book requires sort of directed attention and it's
mm,
a much more active process. I guess, yeah, maybe my explanation for it as well is like I think there's a lot more room for interpretation reading just words on a page.
mm.
It's like people can use their own like
Yeah,
imaginations and
yeah.
also like reread and reflect.
Mm,
Whilst I feel like TV and film is more about, not necessarily more about, but it's often about being flashy and sort of
mm,
much faster pace, and everyone is presented with the same image, and therefore there's less space for that kind of
mm.
interpretation.
And we talked about it a couple of episodes back, didn't we, with regard to kind of literalism in modern
Mm,
film and so on. So almost like some of that complexity is being lost, even if there's a sort of clear and positive message coming through. It's almost like it's lost any of the layers, the texture of the complexity of that. Um, do you think it's particularly? I mean, obviously, like, there's like real benefits to kind of long form film media and things like that, televisual media that allows us to go into the same sort of like depth as a book, even though, as you say, it can be more passive, although probably depends on what you're watching, how passive it can be. Otherwise, if it's got any complexity at all, you lose what's going on fairly quickly if you're also like texting and knitting a sock and so on all at the
yeah,
same time.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
but stuff like, I don't know, like TikTok or like little videos on Instagram or just like sound bites, things like that. That seems to me to be the worst kind of
yeah.
replacement for
So
long
like
form
short
content.
form, yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. I think like you know, a lot of again, we've like talked a lot about, I feel, sort of phone addiction stuff and consumption of social media. And I think like a lot
mm,
of my friends also struggle with the same thing. And I'm like trying to get out of that by saying, if I do want to sit down and watch something, then I'm going to decide to watch like a YouTube video over going on TikTok
mm,
or scrolling on Instagram or something, where
mm,
it's like, I'm trying to increase. I feel like step one is trying to increase that attention span.
mm,
Um, but yeah, I think it's really, there's like more and more research coming out about how like short form video content and like social media in general is just like there's like confirmed correlation between that and like poor mental health, even sort of
mm,
worse executive functioning and academic
mm.
performance. So it's also having impact on language development for like young kids.
Yeah.
And like it's massively linked to like depression, insomnia, stress,
Mm.
and like it's sort of unhappiness,
And is
decreased happiness. There we go. Go on, sorry, as you were saying.
no, I was going to say, and is that? Do you have any impression about whether that's about the kind of content that people are consuming, or is it also about the way in which that content is being kind of
Um,
relayed? Because
yeah, I
obviously, like,
mean,
there's a lot of shitty
we've
people
got,
on the internet,
yeah. Well, obviously, we have the
but
Online Safety Act. It's just
doing
passed through,
sterling
so
work at the moment.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's probably is a combination of the sort of
Mm,
content and the form of
mm,
content. Like I think in sort of the papers that I've looked through for
mm,
the notes today, it like the different explanations for why people feel this way is just like self-esteem issues through like unhealthy comparisons. So that's just like
mm,
generally I don't know. I think you can always find someone to compare yourself to, whether that's like a negative or a sort of bad content that
mm,
you're watching. Just like general feelings of burnout and I think oh yeah, and social anxiety, like increased social anxiety due to
mm,
decreased real life social interactions, which we see
mm,
lots of in Fahrenheit 451. I guess also like increases like the sort of like fear mongering of difference.
mm.
And yeah, the lack of the the fear of the unknown and lack of
Yeah.
interaction with different types of people can like increase this kind of
Mm,
I don't know prejudice and
mm.
things like that. Anyways, But yeah,
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting. Certainly, friends of mine who are academics have said that there's an increasing problem with, I mean, this is going to be more in the arts and humanities
mm,
than in the sciences, but an issue with students starting university with an inability effectively to read books, to consume books at the
mm,
sort of with sort of competence, length, depth, and so on that's required to do that kind of study. And obviously, it's true for the sciences as well. It's just that the papers may be shorter with more graphs rather than like massive tomes like you might get in studying English or whatever. But that lack of not just literacy, but kind of competence and comfort in consuming written material. But it's about other things as well. And I think this comes back to why it's not just kind of like about books. As you say, there's this thing with concentration, but there's also something about the kind of with quality literature, or for that matter, quality
mm,
film, television, and so on, you as the viewer, reader, are required to interrogate, to ask questions, to do the sort of stuff we do on this podcast,
mm.
to get the full kind of depth of meaning and so on. And that can mean that you can be confronted with stuff that is really difficult to read or watch without somebody hammering home and saying, this is bad. You bring your own kind of context and experience to sort of say, okay, this idea is outdated or whatever, but I can see that and I can interrogate it and I can see the way in which we can do better. So there's something about, because 451 talks about like the issues with the I mean, it uses sort of again dated racist racial language, but basically sort of saying, well, people of color didn't like this book, and then white people didn't like this book, and so we were kind of like trying to create media that sort of
Didn't offend
doesn't
anyone
defend
or
anybody, and
yeah,
so it's basically got like no sort of substance to it at all.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that that's, we can all make choices about what we read and consume and so on, but there's also something about being able to come to things with, I guess, the tools to be able to interpret it and to contextualize it and so on. And that's what really worries me about kind of like media literacy now, that and some countries I know are doing much better than others in terms of like how this is done in school, but basically the complete inability to be able to vet the quality of the material you're consuming. The idea that you get stuff being not just not fact checked, but like people taking it at face value because they don't have the skills to interrogate it, or perhaps the desire as well, but just like the kind of like level of it's not even intellect, it's about like having that sort of the mind that traditionally universities were trying to create, the idea that you could think about things for yourself. And that's what
Hmm.
Montag eventually realized this is what this book stuff is all about. It's about being able to think for yourself.
Think stuff, yeah. I guess the philosophy of censorship and control in Fahrenheit 451 comes from the whole purpose of burning books and making sure people aren't free thinkers is to basically like decrease like disagreements between people, and
Mm.
like the idea that being a deep thinker will cause these disagreements,
Yeah,
and
isn't it a thing about like how
therefore
philosophers are just like
yeah,
one
like
person
always like
arguing at another person?
downplaying each other's
Yeah,
ideas
yeah,
and being like,
exactly.
oh, insulting each other
Yeah.
academically. And I think there's a bit where BT kind of talks about, I feel like he believes that people can't argue and come to amicable
Mm,
agreements between
mm,
each other, and therefore that's where kind of conflict and
mm,
unhappiness is like derived from.
mm,
Um, yeah, so if you ultimately just make everyone super apathetic and kind of docile by like just feeding them all of this like sort of same rubbish,
mm,
I guess. Yeah, so he kind of sort of says how it's a healthy society, healthy in quotation marks, needs like unity, and this unity is achieved through like having everyone conform and stifling this like thought and independence. And like, with the character, like Clarissa's character, I think that's shown how she's treated in school for being different.
mm,
um and even, I don't know, her suspicious death I feel.
Mm,
I mean, that could be like, there's lots of different mentions about even how the youth in Fahrenheit 451
mm,
all behave. They're actually quite
yeah,
violent, but like her death and the
yeah,
like sort of move slash removal of her family from the
yeah.
street, because they were different, and they
Mm,
decided to reject modern technology and like to spend time together. But yeah, I guess another interesting thing within this for the philosophy in Fahrenheit 451 is like it feels like there's this obsession with creating peace and
mm,
making sure there's no conflict, but actually Clarice talks about how much her like the youth of this book and in America
mm,
are actually really violent,
mm.
and they are often killing each other as well as like yeah, so I don't know.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think you pick on something that's really interesting. I mean, it's if we think about the sort of dystopian novels, the great dystopian novels of the mid or early to mid 20th century, this idea of alleged happiness above everything else, and the idea that happiness and conformity go together, and that liberty should be given up in favor of happiness. I mean, it's there in 1984, but it's particularly there in Brave New World. And then it's picked up again in Fahrenheit 451. But this idea that if you want to be happy, then you have to essentially kind of cede the parts of yourself that would make you unhappy. And the parts of yourself that would make you unhappy include things like disagreement and conflict, as you say.
Mhm.
And it's in the background, or in the background, of course, is a second nuclear war going on, that ends up, wiping out the city at the end. Yet the people don't seem to be politically engaged.
Mm.
There's quite, I don't know, it's a sort of slightly misogynistic but also quite funny bit, isn't it, when he's talking to his wife's friends about who they
Yeah.
voted for in the election. Was it I laid it on the line for President Noble. I think he's one of the nicest looking men who ever became president. Oh, but the man they ran against him, he wasn't much, was he? Kind of small and homely, and he didn't shave too close or comb his hair very well. Um, and even a bit about the fact that, like, the guy who won was called Winston Noble, which is a better name than Hubert Hogue. um, but I mean, I don't know how that feels so relevant to not just American politics, although there's a certain amount of that, I think, in presidential election, and it's, these the way in which people are promoted, but just generally this kind of like very superficial way of understanding the things that really matter, that definitely comes through. I was going to say something about the linguistics about
Mhm.
it as well, because one of the things that the text does is it plays around with ideas around rewriting history.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't know how you feel, but I feel like this, and we mentioned this last episode before, something about the idea that within 100 years of the Second World War, we seem to be forgetting the lessons of what led to the rise of fascism in Europe. And we see like an amended history being put forward in Fahrenheit 451,
Mhm.
where, for example, there were never people who put out fires, they always set them or whatever,
Mhm.
um even though that makes no sense when interrogated. It's but there's also then this kind of like linguistic element to it as well, because firemen, and they are all men in a novel from 1953, I don't think we should be surprised there, but that allows you to mean that could be people who set fires, or it could be people who fight fires. If we call them firefighters, which I think we do now, unless they're like Fireman Sam, I suppose, but like firefighters, that's obvious. Yeah, the meaning is clearly expressed in the name that is given to them. And I was thinking about like the power of the way that kind of propaganda exploits misnomers and incorrect linguistic or imprecise linguistic terms. So the
Mhm.
use of terms like illegal immigrant to summarize somebody who has what entered the country by an unofficial route. There is no such thing under law as an illegal immigrant. You cannot be an illegal person, and it's not illegal to cross the channel seeking asylum. But that term, in and of itself, the moment it gets used, carries all this kind of these connotations that asylum seeker, undocumented worker, refugee, or whatever doesn't necessarily carry. So there's something really interesting there, I think, in the way that not having the context, i.e., the understanding of history, and not having the grasp of linguistics or of the importance of words all feed into the possibility of a spread of a particular way of thinking or not thinking. I don't know. I don't think that there are many highly educated people spraying red crosses onto roundabouts at the moment, but I might be wrong about that. If you have a PhD and you're doing it, please get in touch and explain to us what has led to this rise in your fascist ideology. Thank you so much. What did you think about like Montag's arc, as it were, his sort of journey to changing sides, I suppose, for want of a better term?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's I think one of the like sort of central themes that is like explored in Montag's arc is like isolation to connection. So I think in exact opposite to Montag, well, so we have Montag and both Mildred in isolation, even though they're married, they can't seem they have issues communicating with one another. They don't even really seem to like each other very much, and there's this kind of like unsaid, like unspoken about sort of unhappiness. But, as he meets Clarice, she's the sort of first form of proper connection, having conversations with each other that actually sort of seem to mean something, and seem important. And he sort of like awakens, and he also reconnects with Faber, and then eventually ends up in a community, which is the old professors and intellectuals in the sort of like book community that he meets in the woods. Yeah, and then we still have Mildred on the other side of that, who is, then that direct contrast, who decides to stay with her family, quote unquote, on TV rather than engage in human connection. And even like as she discovers, even in towards the end of the book when Montag arrives at his own house to start a fire, she completely ignores him and basically leaves on her own, not giving him like a second look. Yeah, I don't know. What do you think about it?
I think that your point about kind of relationship and the meeting of like-minded people is really important because, like, Clarice is interesting insofar as she's not bookish. We're told that there's like a file in her family, but they haven't been found to have any books. What they do is they have the conversations that people are apparently no longer having, and she's constantly sort of saying my uncle, and the things that her uncle did that are considered kind of like dodgy or deviant or possibly criminal are stuff like walking, being a pedestrian, and driving at 40 miles an hour so that he could actually see what he was passing rather than always going at 100 miles an hour like all their modern cars can. And so this idea of like stopping and taking time and so on is like, I suppose, considered to be like a petri dish for possible kind of revolutionary thought or something like that. But Clarice, the things that she likes to do are stuff like, stop and look at the moon or collect butterflies. We don't condone that, but or just like go out in the woods,
taste the rain,
the
or
birds. Yeah, exactly. It's about experiencing the world around her without doing it through screens and so on. And the thing isn't about being she's considered antisocial at school, and therefore, but her point is, well, how can you be antisocial when you're basically never allowed to actually talk properly with anybody around you? I don't believe that there's a sort of social thing. So I think that's a powerful kind of starting point. I also think it's nice insofar as it has the feeling of the potential of Montag like falling in love with this 17-year-old or whatever. And
Mm.
in the 2018 film, Montag does have a physical relationship of a sort with
Oh
the
no.
Clarice character. And she's older,
Oh, okay.
admittedly,
Thank
the like
goodness.
17 and 30 thing. I think she's older in both films, which is presumably because they wanted to like romantic potential.
I think it works better as like them having more of a father-daughter kind
Yeah, which
of.
is what he sort of says, isn't it? That, he never had
Yeah.
children. But it's also something about this idea that there's a connection for a relationship with books. The connection is made between the two of them, but the relationship that they both have is with what books symbolize essentially. I don't know. I mean, there are hints there, I suppose, of an inversion of that trope of the relationship between professor and student, which happens a lot, but not so much now
Mm.
because there's a lot more kind of rules in place. But there's always been that idea about the sharing of intellectual concepts and the idea of, I suppose, one person leading the other into kind of the opening of the mind, which is then linked with the forming of intimacy. This is like a reversal of that because the one who is
Mm.
able to make those connections and open Montag to it is the this who would be the student normally in that.
Mhm.
But as you say, it's it's very definitively not about that because he has the dandelion held under his chin and it shows that he's not in love with anybody. Oh no, not even Mildred, quite obviously. Um, but and I think because on the one hand, I feel that there's a lot of sort of sexist attitudes reflected in this book because of the context of the time that it was written. It's quite refreshing that it's Clarice who is um, not reduced to either a sexual object nor to kind of somebody who can only fulfill the certain roles of a
Yeah,
woman.
which is that's why I kind of feel like it's weird for them to go and then turn that into like a sexual relationship
Mm.
between
Yeah, disappointing,
like
isn't
Clarissa
it?
Monta. Yeah, I'm just kind
Yeah,
of like, well,
yeah,
you know,
mm.
could be a bit more above that. Like if Clarice
Yeah,
was a 17-year-old boy, like this
yeah.
wouldn't be, I don't know. Anyways.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You just bet they wouldn't have bothered then, would they? You could have had a
Mm.
whole homoerotic storyline, but no, they definitely Hollywood wouldn't have done that. Marriages and relationships generally are very like negatively presented, I think,
Mm.
in the text. Because so there's the whole bit, isn't there, about like women who've had multiple marriages and not having children or having children um by cesarean, serious kind of
And multiple
dubious judgment
abortions
by
and yeah.
a man going on there. But yeah, something about like I suppose women not doing their traditional role in society, but not because they're pursuing something that we might consider to be like better or more fulfilling or whatever, but because they want to spend their time with these, well, they're basically like
With
24-hour
their
soaps, are
family on
they?
TV.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that language is important, isn't it? You wrote a good bit in the notes about relationships. You want to talk about like Mildred's relationship with her relatives
Yeah,
in the
so
parlor?
yeah, in the book they refer to Mildred's family in the parlor, which isn't a real human relatives, but instead just like the characters in the TV shows that she watches. And my favorite introduction to philosophy reference, Plato's Cave, as always comes
Yes,
up.
let's do
Oi!
it.
So obviously, like in Fahrenheit 451, this like Mildred's life is consumed by the like media that she watches on TV, and she kind of refuses to even come out of the parlor. And like in the times when Montag tries to kind of grasp her attention, she is almost like afraid and decides to like re-enter deeper into this
Mm.
kind of, I guess, trance that she has with the TV and the radio and everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she doesn't, I guess, in that sense, resist leaving the cave of her media
Mm.
bubble. And it's kind of a positive feedback loop where the more, she spends time in the parlor, the more she's
Mm.
afraid of the outside world,
Mm.
and then sort of recedes deeper
Mm.
back in. And I guess this like the media creates this like false intimacy, which like further drives her isolation and yeah, and it again kind of comes back to one of those like central themes and how I guess Montag starts isolated and comes out of it. Mildred is kept pacified and is therefore easier to manipulate
Mm,
and push propaganda upon, and yeah, encourages sort of conformity and distrust of those who are different.
yeah,
So yeah, I don't know.
yeah.
What do you think of that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that if we think about that the cave allegory, then within that we have quite literally the sort of shadows on the wall, as it were, the projections, and
Mm,
Mildred looking at those. And I suppose that it is
being like
Montag
that's
who,
yeah,
yeah,
my
Montag who is the
family,
one
my
who
relatives, yeah.
goes out and says, no, there's something else, and he tries to show her the books. He comes back into the cave and he reads poetry to the women who have
Hmm.
gathered there in the parlor. And as Plato predicts in the Republic, they kill him in inverted commas by reporting him. So when he comes to tell them and give them that truth, I mean, I would really love to say that poetry could start a revolution, but he was probably misguided in his choice
Oh,
of material.
yeah.
um, and I suppose there's that thing, isn't there, where he he's one of the other things we don't talk about in terms of relationship, but he's seeking a teacher. And one of the issues, I suppose, is that when you strip a culture of its ability to engage with the material in literature, philosophy, history, and so on, then it's very hard for people to find their way back because they haven't got the skills and they haven't got anyone to teach them the skills. And so one of the things we see is Montag wanting to engage with this literature, wanting
Hmm.
to understand what it is that this poetry means or what the actual text of the Bible says rather than the say like Jesus on the screen who also like advertises products and things like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So he wants to sort of understand this difficult, I mean it's difficult material. In the 2018 film, interestingly, it's Dostoevsky is the book that he takes instead of the Bible. And Dostoevsky, again, a writer who really kind of plumbs the depth of human experience, philosophy, ethics, relationship with God, things like that. And it's not easy stuff. And you can see the way that it's sort of beautiful, but you want to understand it. And that's why he's looking for somebody. And sort of he finds Faber to try and be that person. But there's also something of a message of the idea that yes, you can be taught this, but it's also about thinking for yourself. And through I guess, that process of starting to ask questions, then you will start
Mm,
to understand answers.
yeah.
Um,
I guess like Montag kind of flags that up through saying, I don't want to just let's go, or be on one side being told what to do to switch to another side to
yeah,
being like
yeah,
told what to believe.
mm,
Yeah, and it's like I guess that's what Faber kind of says is like instead of someone else interpreting the text for you, you need to
mm.
read it and make your own understanding. But to be fair, I also sympathize because I feel like I've tried to pick up Dostoevsky before. Goes over
Yeah,
my
you're
head
right. It's
completely.
yeah. I think that there is a reason why we have commentaries and lectures and things like that. Things to we read up on stuff, JSTOR or whatever, to see what other people have said before we do these things. But there is also, I suppose, that thing about having the skills and learning the skills, and we sort of are led to sort of understand how actually within every kind of normal kind of society in this world of Fahrenheit 451, there are people who have these skills and this experience and they've learned material from books and so on, so that even when the books are burned, it's actually the people who can perpetuate it and the idea of, I suppose, of teaching it to future generations.
Mm.
Faber believes that he's been a coward in the whole attack on books. I mean, a sort of funny little character behind his doors or whatever, where they letting Montag in and saying that he himself has never sort of stood up and that sort of thing. Did you have any thoughts on his character and that idea that he feels that he's a coward?
Yeah, I guess maybe there was like a level where he felt he was kind of complicit,
Mm.
sort of like standing by it and letting it happen, like letting sort of all these things happen. I don't know if there's a part in the book where he said he was like sort of seeing his co-workers take a stand,
Mm.
but
Yeah, I think that is right.
he didn't do anything until it was like a bit too late. I don't know. What do you think? What do you think of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think where is that bit? Is yeah, it's okay. Mr. Montague, you are looking at a coward. I saw the way things were going a long time back. I said nothing. I'm
Mm,
one of the innocents who could have spoken up and out when no one would listen to the guilty, but I did not speak and thus became guilty myself. And finally, they set the structure to burn the books using the firemen. I grunted a few times and subsided, for there were no others grunting or yelling beside with me by then. Now it's too late. There is something about that idea that people, if they feel that they are not affected themselves by something, they won't put
yeah, I
themselves
get,
in harm's
kind
way.
of comes back to like apathy towards
Yes,
the issue. And it's
yeah.
like I think it's like reflected in also like the war that's kind of like
Mhm.
brewing during the course of the book.
Mhm.
Like there's like this sort of overall apathy towards the war, and like I guess, Mildred and her friends and the way that they speak about politics, sort of believing it won't affect them.
Mm.
um, and sort of like relinquishing any say in the sort of
Yeah.
societal events to just like the letting the state make all decisions, and like
Mm.
ultimately gets the whole city sort of bombed, and everyone dies. Yeah, and I think that's kind of like on a smaller scale. We can see that's like how it's like a bigger scale representation of what
Mm.
Faber was saying, was
Yeah.
like, he didn't say anything until it was too late.
I suppose that two things sort of spring to mind. One is just because it came to me as you were sort of saying that. It's like when people say you meet them and you sort of say, finding out about them or whatever, and
Mm.
you're dating app or meeting someone the first time, whatever, and they say, "Oh, I'm not political," and I just think that is the most stupid thing I've
Yeah,
ever heard because everything is political.
it's
You can't
political.
not be interested in politics if you are interested in just like all
Like
things that affect
day-to-day
everyone around
life.
you.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah,
literally.
but I suppose that is the thing, is that apathetic element. But there's also a positive thing I think about Faber, which is that he sort of says, I didn't stand up when I should have done, but he does stand up and he does help Montag and he does set out to do things that will make a difference to this movement, both in terms of trying to keep Montag safe to return a book, whatever,
Mm.
and what else does he do? Oh, like helping him when he's running away from the hound and going to have more copies of the Bible printed. These are bold things that he does. So it's sort of like you don't have to live in the shadow of the things that you failed to do because you can always stand up and do things that are right today. And it doesn't matter
Mm.
that you didn't use the hashtag on the same day as everybody else. If you use it today and you make that stand, we get a lot of criticism saying, oh, it's too late. But that shouldn't stop people from doing and acting, I suppose. One of the things I wondered about, I was going to ask, is what did you think of Beatty and his attitude to books as the whatever his fire captain? Because he quotes tons of books.
Yes, he does. I guess he, during sort of Montag's initial fervor of like
Mm-hmm.
trying to reject, he can't be like BT comes and asks him like, how long is this illness going to go on for? And almost says, I've been through the same thing and I understand. I feel like he's alluding to a time in his past where he also doubted the institution. It's interesting how it's almost hypocritical that BT rejects books and the things that they sort of, I guess, say, because it ultimately allows him to like rebut against Montag's thoughts and rejections of the institution, and the thing that he's like warning against is like ultimately something that he uses to his advantage. And I guess it's like maybe also like a sign of privilege, that he is benefiting from access to something he says everyone else has to destroy.
Yeah, there's definitely something about this idea that he seems to have benefited from something that he's
Mm,
trying to destroy for everybody else. So that kind of level of hypocrisy. He's also, I don't know, there's something about the way that he's very quick with the quotations and things like that, that's sort of supposed to kind of make him like a battle of the intellects with
mm,
Montag. So I was saying, you're just sort of, I don't know, flirting in the pool of of academia or whatever, but
He also
I
seems
know
to
this
like
stuff.
almost fantasize about it because this
Mm.
intellectual kind of debate that they have is like just part of a dream that he like
Mm.
had and that he's like recounting
Yeah,
to
it's
Montag.
really
Like
weird,
it's
isn't
not
it?
even happened. It's almost like he's
No.
fantasizing about it having
Yeah.
happened.
Yeah. And there's also something about the way in which he uses like a lot of quotation to make him seem clever. That's just
Mm.
very Boris Johnson and the Johnson government, and this idea of I'm sounding clever because I'm giving you this one-liner from this thing I read, which doesn't actually,
Like
people
mean anything, yeah.
yeah, people misquote stuff or like quote it without context all the time and expect it to kind of carry weight, but it's not, again, it's not the thing that's important. Knowing the quotation isn't what's important. It's being able to engage with and filter the
Mm.
ideas that the texts present, that really matters. But yeah, so yeah, I just thought that was an interesting thing. So ultimately, as we've said, we get, well, the burning of Montag's house. He's been betrayed by one of Mildred's friends, and I think also Mildred herself has rung up Mildred, clinging on to this idea of kind of what she perceives to be happiness, even though we know that she attempted suicide. But people seem to do that all the time in this book, despite the fact that they're so happy. And then Montag is faced with this decision, and the decision he makes is essentially to set fire to Beatty, who he mentions later is essentially seems to be accepting some kind of like suicide by kerosene fiery thing. Um, this causes him to go on the run, being chased by an enormous mechanical dog that can like track down and smell anybody. All of it is put out on the like screens in everybody's homes. They can watch the chase, so it functions itself as a propaganda message, even though they kill somebody else and just say it was Guy.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he ends up in this wilderness situation following the railroad with this kind of group of hobos who are all former professors of this, that, and whatever.
It's kind of giving a bit of like like a Wizard of Oz kind of
Yeah,
yellow brick
yeah,
road kind of
yeah,
little gang, ragtag
absolutely.
gang.
Yeah. And I guess there is something like about the kind of like the world thing, insofar as it's like the city is the place that's dominated by the power of the state and so on, and then you move out into the kind of fringes, and actually, I mean, it's sort of there's a little bit, isn't there, a theme of kind of like the rural idyll versus the sort of dangers of the urban world and so on. But
Yeah, they're
he
like
moves,
metropolitan, yeah.
yeah, um, but I think what I liked about it is obviously they know who he is and they welcome him because his name's been all over the news. But he hopes to learn from them, but they want to know what he can bring to the mix, as it were. And he discovers that there are things that they're looking for, the fact that he's asking the right questions and so on, and also the fact that he's read Ecclesiastes and Revelation, and they claim to be able to get him to remember all the stuff he read once. Sort of
Which is
amazing
crazy.
memory
That
technique.
was
Yeah.
yeah, I wish that was
Yeah.
something I could accomplish.
Um, I suppose, I mean, I suppose it comes back to things where people sort of say, well, if one person has got the ability to have like a photographic memory, then the brain must
Mm,
be capable of it. So can we kind of like replicate this in everyone? But
mm.
handy anyway. But sort of the difference, as you mentioned in your kind of like summary, is that although his original plan was to make really kind of like big and radical actions, turning the fires onto the people who onto the firefighters, and so sorry, not firefighters, firemen. I'm just doing my natural kind of like, oh, let's not have a gendered word here, and then I'm like, oh no, that doesn't work. Onto the firemen and their homes, doing things that have the same, I guess, power and sort of like elements of loftiness as the woman who killed herself along with her books, set the whole thing on fire with her own match, martyred herself to the cause. But these old professors and so on, they don't have anything so radical in mind. They anticipate there being like a future after the war. They believe that will provide the context in which people will desire again to turn to what books have to offer, and then all of these people who've memorized these texts and who bring these skills will be able to, I suppose, start to revitalize that culture. And I just wondered what you thought of that as a sort of quiet revolution or not, whether it was satisfactory.
I think it was almost like a realistic ending in the sense that the revolution, it's a very quite a short book and almost the story of like one individual, I guess like kind of breaking out of the quote unquote matrix.
Yeah.
Um, and I think you could consider it unsatisfactory, but I feel like not every story needs to be some sort of like great epic, where we're tearing down the institution in a single novel. It was almost quite like a humanitarian kind
Mm,
of conclusion where these people were saying, we're gonna hold on to this knowledge and slowly rebuild
mm,
and pass it on to our,
mm,
pass it on generation to generation,
mm.
rather than kind of, going out guns blazing. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that's maybe how I interpreted it.
Yeah, I think I get that. I think there's also something there that ties in with the, was it like the democratic
Mm,
nature of books. The internet was supposed to be able to bring knowledge to more people, and to some
hmm
extent it did. But actually, what we need is better funded libraries and all of that sort of stuff. Not just kind of abandoning books in favor of TikTok or whatever.
mm.
But there's something, yeah, about them sort of saying, well, we are books ourselves. It's not us that's important. It's the things that we carry and our ability to
Carry.
make those
Yeah.
accessible to others.
Mm.
That sort of, it's an eradication of the self in a way, but
Yeah, and that I guess that string of like, you aren't important,
yeah, it's obviously very
and
counter the culture of the text where it's all about, oh, this soap has put a part in for you and things like
yes,
that.
yeah,
Yeah.
kind of like the individualistic kind of society.
Mm,
Yeah, it's kind of like rejecting that and being like we're part of a bigger collective.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and with that, something about the idea, I guess, of a different sort of community. There's a bit where
Mm.
Clarice says that like even like the design of houses has tried to move us away from place spaces in which people can have like proper discussion and interact with their neighbors.
Mm.
Like there's no gardens, there's no
No
porches, which I suppose is quite an
porches, yeah.
American thing, but
I think that's like also reflected a lot in the like disappearance of like third spaces in the real world. Like,
yeah.
if you want to be somewhere outside of just your house
Mm,
or your place of work, like
mm,
it, you either have to spend money to go
mm,
out and do it, or yeah, like like to be able to access places where you can meet other people
yeah.
and share conversation and thoughts and like enjoy other people's company. It's like
Mm,
it's like been monetized now, so it's not even really like
yeah.
accessible to the average person.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's just like
absolutely.
again like driving more isolation. But
Mm. And that's
yeah.
the absolutely the sort of thing where I think that if you're thinking about sort of practical lessons from this, that idea of kind of grassroots opportunities for community to
Mm,
change that sort of thing, particularly to create spaces for young people, because I think that that's really pivotal. The idea that, you have somewhere to go that doesn't involve loitering on street corners or whatever. We've got here in Ipswich, we have really, really good parks, which is fantastic. But they're only open until a certain time of the evening or whatever, which is
yeah, and
probably
also it's
wise in
England,
lots
it's
of
cold, it's
exactly.
damp,
So it's it's
yeah.
fantastic in the summer, and for people who want outside space, but it has its limitations. So we need to expand on that. So I think that's a really valid point for community space. And the other thing that I thought was quite interesting about the that community that Montag finds himself in at the end is the way in which they engage with quiet and silence, in fact. And this, I think, is one of the difficult but I think really important lessons that I felt came out of the text. This idea that we're in a culture now where, and I'm awful for this, just kind of have to have something at all
Yeah.
times.
Yeah, yeah. In the
Not
background. Like
necessarily like scrolling on my phone, but like,
no, no, just like music or a
music or
podcast, or
exactly,
like even as you
exactly.
go to
Yeah.
sleep, like I know so many
Yeah.
people who can't just fall asleep in
Yeah.
silence. Like there has to be
Exactly.
something constantly on.
Yeah.
Mm.
And, and I would say, I'm somebody who does do quite a lot of thinking, but I don't do a lot of thinking that actually sort of like without external sort of
Stimulation,
something,
maybe.
yeah, some sort of
Yeah.
stimulation or something to like buffer me from the thoughts I don't want to like get into or that sort of thing.
Mm.
And in the past, I have done some sort of stuff with like meditation and things like that, but it's really, really hard. So like you
Mm.
have to do the work. The idea of putting yourself into a space that is essentially kind of like not distracted by external stimuli or by irrelevant sort of things in your own head is really difficult.
It feels like quite vulnerable, I think, to be like so like
Mm,
I don't know, just like
yeah,
mentally like quiet. I think
yeah,
people, don't want to engage,
yeah.
with themselves or like any negativity. And it's like
Mm,
again, how like, the constant media consumption is just like mindless fun.
mm. So, yeah, and as you say, I do think it does come back to sort of processes like reading a book, for example,
Mm,
which, I do listen to a lot of audiobooks, but I also do read books. But when you read a book, that's what you're doing, right? That's the thing. And so it does require you to engage and put yourself in a different space. And given that, there are really depressing numbers coming out in terms of like reading for fun and what's happening to it, something, some sort of shift is presumably required in the way that we engage with the world that would bring that back,
mm.
which I think would be good. But yeah. So are we there? Do you have any
I think so.
final message things?
I think we like pretty much covered everything.
You wrote real change only happens when people come together.
Claire
Very nice.
definitely wanted me to say that one, and I didn't pick up on this.
It's just such a like
My
nice
bad.
t-shirty slogan.
Yeah,
um,
yeah, yeah.
but yeah, I think there is something about, if I sort of contextualize it within this podcast, the way that
Mm,
we have conversations about these texts, even if like I'll go on for a while, it is usually me go on for a while, but it's still a conversation. The idea
mm,
of entering into that rather than just, I don't know, spouting your opinion or whatever, but actually like going to and fro on it brings out like, you bring out my thoughts and maybe vice versa. And I think that's, we need more of those spaces. And we record these things on Zoom, so we don't even need a sort of like special space to do it. So internet is good. We like it for things like this. So cool. Okay. I liked that. I was very pleased. I just say like it's such a lyrical novel. It's
yeah,
not difficult, even though
definitely.
it's literary, and I just, yeah, very beautiful. Also
No,
very short. So
yeah, it is. Yeah, all of those things.
yeah,
I think it's
yeah,
quite like I definitely think it's very accessible.
mm.
And I don't know, but not in a way that it's like oversimplifying things. As
No,
it's like you can
exactly.
like
Yeah.
can still make your own interpretations.
Mm.
So there you go.
So cool. Okay. Well, slight change in scheduling around, I don't know, holidays, start of terms, things like that. We're going to do, what did I say it was called? The Pod Generation, also in response to slightly alarming news articles. So we'd like to be current. We're going to do The Pod Generation, which is a film about having babies without a human uterus. And that will be our next episode. And then we will be coming back to Arcadia, which we already trailed, that we're going to do after that. So look out for those. Alternate weeks, we have our Substack. So just look for Dystopian Fiction Current Affairs on Substack, or you can find us on Instagram, Blue Sky. You can check out our website. We have a lovely new shop on our website, which is now actually working. Hurrah! So you can find merch and art and stuff like that you can buy and then support us so that we can do more exciting stuff and buy more books and that sort of thing. So it'd be great. um, Anything else? Have I forgotten anything?
think that's about it.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much. We will
Thank you.
speak to you all again in 2 weeks' time.
Bye.